The wife took care of her sick husband for 9 years. Until one day, she came home early and was shocked to hear a conversation between him and the neighbor. This is a touching story. My name is Claire, and for 9 years, I dedicated my life to taking care of my husband, Richard. Our marriage was always based on love and partnership, and when he fell ill, I knew my role was to be by his side, as we had always been for each other. Richard was diagnosed with a degenerative disease, something that completely changed our lives. From the moment of the diagnosis, my routine transformed. Every day was a battle, a fight against time, and the disease that slowly debilitated him. I woke up early to prepare his breakfast and give him his medication. Then, I helped him get dressed and accompanied him to his physical therapy sessions. Our days were filled with doctor's appointments, tests, and treatments. At night, I made sure he was comfortable before finally lying down, often exhausted, but certain that I was doing the best for him. It was difficult, but there were also moments of tenderness. We shared memories of our best times, laughed at stories from the past, and despite the pain, found ways to be happy. Richard was my world, and I was willing to do anything for him. Our neighbor, Mrs. Martha, was always a constant presence. A kind lady, widowed for many years, who always offered to help. Sometimes she brought hot soup or offered to stay with Richard while I ran errands. I trusted her like a friend, someone who genuinely cared about our well-being. One day, I decided to leave work a little earlier. I felt I needed to spend more time with Richard. After all, our moments together were precious. When I got home, something seemed different. The door was slightly open, and I could hear voices coming from the living room. As I approached, I recognized Mrs. Martha's voice. Initially, I thought she was just talking to Richard, as usual, but then I heard something that left me paralyzed. "Richard, I don't know how much longer I can hide this from Claire," said Mrs. Martha, with a tone of concern in her voice. Richard, with his weakened voice, replied, "Martha, she can't know. If she finds out, everything will fall apart. We need to keep this up until we find a solution." My heart raced. What were they hiding from me? I felt a mix of fear and curiosity. Slowly, I moved closer to hear better, trying to understand what was happening. Suddenly, a feeling of betrayal washed over me. How could they be hiding something so important? And what could be so serious that it could make everything fall apart? With my heart pounding and my breath quickening, I decided to confront them. I walked into the living room, trying to stay calm, but the worry in my eyes betrayed the whirlwind of emotions I was feeling. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Mrs. Martha and Richard looked at each other, visibly surprised and uncomfortable. Martha tried to smile reassuringly, but she couldn't hide her apprehension. "Claire, it's nothing serious," she began, but her voice betrayed the truth. "We were just discussing some concerns about Richard's health." "Concerns about his health that can't be shared with me?" I retorted, feeling the anger begin to rise within me. "We've been married for over a decade. We've been through so much together. I can't believe you're hiding something from me." Richard, with a tired but determined expression, tried to intervene. "Honey, it's not what you think. We were just trying to resolve some things before worrying you. You already have so much to deal with." My mind was racing. What could be so serious that they needed to hide it from me? I had always been the person Richard confided everything in. This secret was corroding our relationship, and I needed to know the truth. "Resolve what?" "I demand to know what's going on," I said, crossing my arms and looking at both of them. Mrs. Martha sighed deeply, as if deciding something important. "Claire, maybe it's better if you sit down. I think we should talk openly about this." I sat down, though every fiber of my being was on alert, ready for the revelation to come. What could they be hiding that was so terrible as to keep it a secret for so long? Mrs. Martha began to speak, her tone calm but heavy. "Claire, there's something we need to tell you. It's not easy, and I know it will be a shock, but you deserve to know the truth." Richard squeezed my hand, as if seeking strength in me to endure what was coming. "Honey, what we've been hiding isn't about my health. It's about something that happened a long time ago. Something we tried to fix but couldn't." I was confused. What could be so serious? Please, just say it. The anxiety is killing me. Mrs. Martha took a deep breath again and continued. Richard and I have a secret we've kept for years. Before you got married, he made a mistake that resulted in a consequence we tried to hide from everyone. I looked at Richard, waiting for him to explain. He seemed paler than ever. Claire, I had an affair before we got married. It was a moment of weakness, and I regretted it immediately. But from that relationship, a child was born. I felt as if the ground had opened up beneath me. A child? You have a child with another woman? Yes, Claire. A boy. We thought it was best for everyone to keep it a secret. His mother, unfortunately, died shortly after childbirth, and Martha helped me take care of him. He has lived all this time as if he were her grandson. Richard confessed, tears filling his eyes. My mind spun with this revelation. Richard had a child, and that child was living right next door, as if he were Mrs. Martha's grandson. All this, while I took care of him, without knowing the truth. The silence after the revelation was deafening. My head spun with so many questions, so much pain. Why didn't you ever tell me? I asked, my voice a thread of pain and disbelief. How could you keep this a secret for so long? Mrs. Martha, trying to calm the situation, responded, Claire, it was a difficult decision. Richard was afraid of losing you, and I thought I was helping by keeping this secret. We knew it was wrong, but as time passed, it became harder to reveal the truth. And this boy? Where is he now? I needed answers. I needed to understand everything. Richard, still holding my hand, explained, His name is Luke. He's at school now. He's 9 years old, Claire. He doesn't know anything about me. To him, I'm just a close friend of Grandma Martha. The magnitude of what he was saying finally hit me. There was an innocent child in the middle of all this, a child who didn't know who his real father was. And now? What are we going to do? I asked, feeling the confusion and pain grow in my heart. Richard looked at me with a look of regret and pleading. I don't know, Claire, but I know we need to do the right thing. I can't keep hiding this. I want you to meet Luke. I want him to know who his father is, and I want us to somehow be a family. The idea of trying to be a family with such a big secret between us seemed impossible. But I also knew I couldn't keep living with this lie. There was much to consider, much to think about and process. The revelation about Luke changed everything. My life, previously entirely dedicated to caring for Richard, was now in a whirlwind of emotions and difficult decisions. I spent sleepless nights trying to understand how all this could have happened without me noticing. And more importantly, how I could move forward knowing this truth. The next day, I asked to meet Luke. I wanted to meet him, see with my own eyes the child who was at the center of this secret. Mrs. Martha arranged a meeting at her house, ensuring it would be something calm, without many explanations for the boy. When I arrived, Luke was playing in the yard. He was an adorable child, with curious eyes and a smile that reminded me so much of Richard that my heart ached. When he saw me, he ran to me with the energy and joy typical of a child. Hi, are you Grandma Martha's friend? He asked, with no idea of the complexity of the situation. Yes, I'm your grandma's friend, I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. My name is Claire. We spent some time playing together, and I was impressed with Luke's intelligence and kindness. He was a special child, and I couldn't blame him for anything. He hadn't chosen to be in this situation. While Luke played, Mrs. Martha approached me. Claire, he's a good boy. I didn't want you to meet him this way, but I think it's better like this. The truth needed to come out. I looked at her, still feeling a mix of anger and gratitude. I understand, Martha. It's not easy, but we need to find a way to deal with this. I need time to think. In the days that followed, I talked a lot with Richard. The physical therapy sessions and daily care continued, but now there was an underlying tension between us. We needed to resolve this, and the only way was to face the truth together. One night, while we were sitting in the living room, I decided it was time for a serious conversation. Richard, we need to talk about Luke. We need to tell him the truth and find a way to integrate him into our lives. Richard nodded, his eyes filled with regret. I know, Claire. I've been a coward for so long, but I'm ready to face this if you're by my side. The decision was made. The following weekend, we called Luke and Mrs. Martha for a conversation. We sat in the living room, and Richard began to speak, his voice trembling but determined. Luke, there's something we need to tell you. It's important, and I want you to know that we will always be here for you. I am your dad. Luke looked at Richard with wide eyes, not fully understanding. But Grandma Martha said my dad died. Mrs. Martha intervened, with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, my dear. I lied to you. Richard is your dad, and he's always been around to take care of you. The boy was silent for a moment, absorbing the information. Then, with the wisdom and simplicity of children, he looked at Richard and said, So, does that mean I can call you Dad now? Richard, with tears running down his face, just nodded. Yes, son. You can call me Dad. It was a moment of intense emotion. A moment that marked the beginning of a new phase in our lives. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to make it work. For Richard, for Luke, and for myself. In the days that followed, things started to settle down gradually. Richard and I tried to integrate Luke into our routine, giving him the space to adapt to the new reality. Conversations with him were essential to build a relationship based on the truth. Luke, surprisingly, accepted the situation well. Children have an incredible ability to adapt, and he soon started calling Richard Dad and seeing me as an important figure in his life. His presence brought a new dynamic to our home, a mix of challenges and joys. Meanwhile, Richard and I also needed to adjust our relationship. Trust had been shaken, and rebuilding it required patience and understanding. Richard was more emotionally present, and his commitment to repairing the damage caused was evident. One night, after Luke went to bed, Richard and I sat down for a serious conversation. Claire, I know I've caused you a lot of pain. I can't change the past, but I want you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild our life together. I sighed, still processing all the emotions. Richard, I love you. That never changed, but we need time. Time to heal, to rebuild our trust, and to adapt to this new reality. We'll do it together, but it won't be easy. He nodded, understanding the depth of my words. I agree, love. We'll take it one step at a time. As the months passed, things began to improve. Luke's presence brought a new purpose to our lives. He was a child full of energy and joy, and his innocence and kindness helped heal many wounds. Richard dedicated himself to being the best father he could be, and I began to see a new side of him, a side that made me love him even more. While things were stabilizing at home, there were still practical issues to resolve. We needed to regularize Luke's situation, including legal and school matters. I went to his school, where the principal, Mrs. Rose, welcomed us warmly. After the visit to the school, we went to the registry office to start the process of paternity recognition. It was a bureaucratic procedure, but necessary to ensure Luke's rights. While we waited, Richard looked into my eyes and said, "Thank you for being by my side, Claire. I know this isn't easy for you, but I'm truly grateful." I squeezed his hand, feeling the sincerity in his words. We're in this together, Richard, for Luke's sake and for ours. Over time, our lives began to find a new balance. Luke's visits to Mrs. Martha's house continued, and he became more and more a part of our family. The difficulties still existed, but now there was a sense of unity and purpose. One day, while I was preparing dinner, Luke entered the kitchen and watched me in silence for a few minutes. Finally, he asked, "Claire, do you think my mom would have been happy to know we're together?" The question took me by surprise, but I smiled at him, trying to convey security. "I'm sure she would, Luke. Your mom wanted the best for you, and I think she would be happy to see that we're taking good care of you and that you're happy." He smiled, satisfied with the answer, and went back to playing in the living room. That question made me reflect on how much we had progressed as a family and how much we still had to go. Richard's illness continued to advance, and we needed to deal with the daily challenges it brought. But now, with Luke by our side, things seemed a bit more bearable. The emotional support he brought was invaluable. One afternoon, while we were at the park, Luke ran to Richard, who was sitting in a wheelchair, and said, "Dad, can I push you?" Richard laughed and nodded. "Sure, son, but be careful, okay?" Seeing that interaction filled me with emotion. The connection between them was palpable, and I knew that despite everything, we had achieved something precious, a family united by love and truth. Years passed, and life went on. Richard continued to fight the disease, but his determination and strength were inspiring. Luke grew quickly, becoming a responsible and loving teenager. One night, while we were gathered in the living room, Richard asked for the floor. He seemed more fragile, but his eyes were full of determination. "Claire, Luke, there's something I want to say to you." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I know my health is getting worse, and I don't know how much time I have left. But I want you to know that I love you both deeply. You are the reason I keep fighting every day." Luke, now 14 years old, held his father's hand. "We love you too, Dad, and we're in this together, always." Richard's words touched me deeply. We knew time was short, but we were determined to make the most of every moment together. The journey had been long and difficult, but also full of love and overcoming obstacles. In the following months, Richard's health deteriorated significantly. We went through difficult times, but also had moments of deep connection and love. Luke showed incredible strength, always by his father's side, always ready to help. Finally, on a quiet morning, Richard left us. His departure was painful, but also a relief to know he would no longer suffer. During the funeral, many tears were shed, but there were also moments of happy memories and celebration of the life he lived. The most valuable lesson I learned in this journey was about the importance of truth and love. Despite the secrets and difficulties, we managed to find our way as a family. And even after Richard's departure, his presence remains alive in our hearts. Luke and I move forward, carrying the memories of Richard and the love he left us. Our family, though incomplete, remains united. And I know that from wherever he is, Richard is looking at us with pride and love. This is the story of how love and truth can overcome even the most difficult challenges. And the lesson we carry in life is that, no matter how hard the journey, what really matters is the love and honesty we share with those we love.